Good evening, everyone. My name is Joanne Fine, and I'm chair of the Albuquerque Police Oversight Board. I'd like to call this meeting to order and thank you all for those of you who are in attendance and those that may be watching at home. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and Mr. Armijo will lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. As always, we start our meetings with a reading of the mission of this body, and that is to advancing constitutional policing and accountability for APD and the Albuquerque community. I need a motion to approve the agenda.
I so motion.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay. I'd like to start by welcoming our new board members, one of whom is here and one is on the way. Here she is. Okay. Let me start by introducing Jim Larson. Mr. Larson is retired. This is Jim Larson right here. Raise your hand. Mr. Larson is retired from Sandia National Labs and has a bachelor's and master's degree of business administration from UNM. Mr. Larson's interest in serving on the board comes from his prior experience in law enforcement and management positions. Mr. Larson is active in other areas of civilian oversight by participating in the Northeast Area Command Community Police council meetings, and POB subcommittees meetings. If appointed, he is appointed. Mr. Larson replaces Dr. David Ring, who's resigned his term, and his term will run from now until February 2nd, 2020. Is that right? 2020, right. Mr. Larson, do you have anything you'd like to say?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Our second is Chelsea Van Deventer. Am I pronouncing it right? Van Deventer? Ms. Chelsea Van Deventer was formerly a trial attorney at the Public Defender's Office. She has a bachelor's degree and a law degree from UNM. Her interest in serving on the board comes from the meaningful discussion of law enforcement and communities that is happening nationally and locally, and recognize the POB as the perfect opportunity to problem solve and move forward. Ms. Van Deventer finds the board's work crucial and is interested in helping the board execute its oversight and policy analysis functions. She replaces Dr. Suzanne Brown, who was, also, like Dr. Ring, one of the original members of this board, and her term will expire February 2nd, 2021. I welcome you both. Public comments. Has anyone signed up for public comments? No. Not even you, Charles? Let me tease you. He's not even paying attention to me. Okay, without public comments, we need a motion to review and approve the minutes from last time. The minutes of our last POB meeting. Do I have such a motion? Okay, does anybody second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay, that passes. All right. Okay, a discussion on the selection of the new POB chair and the vice chair. Can we, I expect Leonard is coming, don't you? I would rather wait. Can we wait on that and put the other ones in front of it? Just do B first and then C and then A? Can we do that? Okay.
You'll want a motion to
change the order?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like a motion to change the order from ABC to BCA.
I second.
Anybody? Well, I can't make the motion. Make a motion.
I motion that we put number 8 down to the bottom of the list here.
Okay.
We're waiting
Second.
till it comes.
I second it.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed, same sign?
No.
Okay. the chief's response to the POB submission of SOP 341. Remind us, who is speaking on this? Is it Mr. Cass or is it Mr. Harness? Dr. Cass, excuse me.
Chair Fine, Honorable Board. The chief has submitted a response to your policy recommendations for 3-41. And the letter outlines the fact that 3-41 is a settlement-related policy. So therefore, it cannot be interpreted and enacted within the 45-day period as prescribed by the ordinance.
Can you tell us, can you remind the audience what it is that we're talking about? What is the policy 341?
3-41 is the policy for handling administrative complaints against APD personnel.
Okay.
And this board made recommendations essentially codifying, or not codifying, essentially taking what is in the ordinance and moving it into policy for APD, for the policy to be a directive to enhance the ordinance. Because it is a settlement-related policy, it must be reviewed by the monitor. It must go through the processes under the settlement agreement. And so therefore, the chief cannot respond with a yes or a no within the 45-day period. So if the letter describes that, but assures that the changes are going to be forwarded to the monitor as the board has recommended them.
Okay. And the whole purpose of this, as I recall, I think we all recall, is to make sure that the policy that APD has is in concurrence with the SOP policy is in concurrence with the ordinance that creates this body. Is that correct?
Chair Fine, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so how does this happen? Then how does the monitor get engaged? Do you tell them? Does the chief tell them? How does it work?
This policy will follow the current prescribed policy development flow, which is in 3-52, which it will go to comment, and then it will go to the Policy Procedures Review Board. It will then go to City Legal, and then it will go to the monitor. That's
and so the
process.
monitor has received a copy of this?
Not to my knowledge at this point.
Should we make sure that that happens, or are we counting on the chief to do that?
Well, the chief has assured the board that it's going to go through their
Okay,
processes.
all right. I just want to make sure that we're not dropping the ball. Okay, are we satisfied that we're not? That we're not dropping the ball? Okay.
Chair Fine,
All right.
yes, I'm satisfied
Okay.
that it's going to go through the processes as the chief described it.
Okay. We have talked in this board a number of times about the challenges that exist with communication for this board of volunteers, some of whom work full-time, to communicate with each other in a more effective way. And one of the thoughts we've had is to make a committee that is just essentially a coordinating committee of the chair of the board and the chairs of the subcommittees, those being outreach, policy, and the case review committee. There is also a personnel committee, and the personnel committee's sole function is to evaluate the director. That happens once a year. In the fall, we just completed that process. So I am suggesting for discussion that we make the personnel committee an ad hoc committee, and that the other committees, the chairs of those committees, serve on this coordinating council with the chair of the board, and that group meet roughly in between board meetings on a regular basis. I think that would enhance communication. I think it would be helpful, very helpful structurally to the chair. And I bring it up for discussion here to get your opinions on this. Does anyone have an opinion about that?
Well, I have opinion. I think it's an excellent idea. That way it's going to really help us to see what the other committees are and what their thoughts are. Because sometimes we're kind of working on our own without communication. And so I think it's a wonderful thing.
Well, I am glad to hear that. Others?
My comment would be just to recall and remember that some of us do work, so it would have to be later in regards to the meeting. 5:30 preferably.
Yeah, I see.
Yes, I have a comment. I'm interested in this as a committee, and I think it's a good idea to have this committee. And I think one of the purposes of the committee should be, given that we've had a lot of turnover in the board, we now have 2/3 of the members who've been on for about a year or less, and I think we need to make ourselves functional, and I think this is one way to do that. I see one of the purposes of this committee is to help board members become better board members and to facilitate what it is we're doing. I think, I'd also like to say that it's, when the board started 3 years ago, I think you were faced, and there's only 3 of you who survived this, but I think you were faced with a real monumental task. I mean, it was a new ordinance. It was resulted from a task force that was created by the council and energized by the DOJ, and there was less than warm reception from APD, and there were other obstacles that were put in place, and I think, as well as having a big backlog of cases, and I think there was a lot of focus in on just that overwhelming task of getting the training to do those cases and then to deal with that. I think now we have a new opportunity. We've got a much more receptive administration, and I think this is a real critical time for the board, and I think this is a good time to become more effective as we get, now that you, and I say this because I wasn't on the board then, but I really have a lot of respect for the obstacles that were faced then, and I think it's now a good chance to make a different kind of progress.
I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Cass. I really couldn't. I think we're at a moment that in the history of this project that it really matters that we have our house in order as we ask APD to make changes and as we work with them toward understanding the changes they're making. I also think that from a practical standpoint, one of the things that bothers me as chair is that Ed and I make the agenda for this board meeting. And that's not enough input. And I think that one of the functions of this committee would be to get input through the committees to the chairs, to this coordinating committee, to make sure that the items they're thinking of, that they don't have to worry about calling the chair. They can do that together. So I think there's a lot of practical aspects to this. I also think there's places where our committees touch, and unless the committee chairs touch, we miss opportunities for connectivity. I think it's a smart idea. I want to assure the board that this is not, in my view, an executive committee. In my experience, executive committees can make decisions in lieu of the board. This would not be the case in this one. This would really be about communication and coordination and coming together somewhere other than just this meeting. And so that's my rationale in my head for this. Are there any other comments?
One of the things that I have been thinking, just onboarding onto this board myself, is that it would be nice if there was like a welcoming committee per se that I think would tie in nicely, not to volunteer you, Eric, but with the personnel committee, that the timing seems to fit well. You've got something that happens in the fall and something towards the end of winter, early spring, that I would love to entertain discussion on if we could offline.
Well, and I just want to be clear about why I said about the ad hocness of the Personnel Committee, because the coordinating committee can't have more than 4 members on it, because it's a quorum. And so that's why I thought the ad hoc thing would make sense, because it was a one-to, I think that's one of the things that came up in Mr. Harness's evaluation, that we really want to make sure that board members do get an orientation as to how they can be useful, and an opportunity to engage as quickly as possible. And so I think that's a really good point. I don't know if we can talk about that offline, or Eric, you can have some thoughts about, and perhaps the rest of the Personnel Committee, whether that's a smart thing, and what do you think about personnel being an ad hoc committee?
I feel that is appropriate in evaluating the director. I'm not sure in how administrating the board, how well it will do in that.
Because in the evaluation process, all the board members are engaged in some way. It's just coordinating that process. So I think your point is really valid. I wonder if that's the only place it might fit, but we should discuss that. And I really think it's a vitally important part of making sure we get board members that are fully engaged. Do any of the rest of you have thoughts on this?
I had a question. So
Yeah.
is what you're proposing having a committee of committee chairs?
Yes,
Okay.
called a coordinating committee.
Coordinating committee. How would we need to document that, or what are our Open Meetings Act obligations at that point?
Well, I think it would be the same as any other committee, and Mr. Jackson can talk about that. We have actually exceeded our responsibilities in our subcommittees. We've done more than the rules require us to do. But the point of this is not to hide it. It's just to make sure that we get the chance to talk to each other. Anybody else who wants to be in the room, I don't care. It would mean that we'd have to change the rules, the rule book.
Chair Fine and Member Cruz, I'm not sure that is accurate.
Okay.
The committees, because they are done for fact-finding or executive purposes and don't hold the decision-making power of the board, are not subject to the Open Meetings Act. Those committees have nevertheless complied with the Open Meetings Act just as a matter of good policy, which I recommend that they continue to do. In terms of creating new committees, whether they be ad hoc or standing committees, the ordinance simply says that the POB may appoint such subcommittees as are deemed necessary or desirable for the purposes of the ordinance. I'm taking out the numbers there. Provided that membership on such subcommittees shall be limited to POB members. And there's nothing in the policies and procedures that the board has adopted that enumerates specific subcommittees.
Oh, really?
So this is
Okay.
something that can be done via motion.
Okay.
And it may be that the welcoming committee that was suggested by Member Galloway would also be an ad hoc type committee that exists only when there are new members who need to be welcomed.
What's your thoughts, sir?
Mine is, I agree with everything you said. One of the things that concerns me is because we have new people on our board, this is a perfect opportunity to do some training that we need so that you're not out there by yourself, and you can understand how we do things and how, what to look for in certain areas and things like that. So it's a great opportunity for training, I think. So maybe that could be part of the agenda of the board, or of that
Of
committee.
identifying training needs for the board
Exactly.
outside of the academy, you mean?
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure,
Okay.
One other question would be, are we going to run into any kind of a quorum issue?
Well, if there's only 4 people on it, then it isn't a quorum issue.
Okay.
Which is why I thought that the personnel could be ad hoc, and then it would be, and we wouldn't have that problem.
I just had one other comment, and that is that the chair makes all the appointments, and I think while it might be a good idea to have all committee chairs, on the other hand, I think it would also be good to be able to, not necessarily limit, have it sort of sort of set up as a committee of subcommittee chairs, but as something that the chair decides on an as-needed basis, because I think it's also a way to include new members in the process. I would not like to see it just be a fixed committee that sort of doesn't allow the introduction of
Well,
new members.
I would correct just one thought, and that is that the committees decide who's going to be the chair, not the chair.
No, I'm talking about the appointments to the committee are all made by the POB chair.
No, they volunteer. Everybody's volunteered for the committees they're on.
And
among the committee members, they pick who the chair is. So it doesn't preclude anybody new being in there. Am I wrong? Am I mistaken?
Well, I think that you have the chair, whoever the chair is at the time, makes all appointments. Now, it's with the consent of the board, and obviously, you won't appoint someone the chair will not appoint someone to a committee who doesn't want to be on that committee. So I think the first step is for people to volunteer for a committee, but the chair of the POB ultimately makes a decision about who's going to serve on the committee.
Is that in the rule book, Mr. Jackson? I don't remember that. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that either.
I don't remember it that way.
Well, the process that we've had in the last 3 years is that we each volunteer for a committee.
Or two.
Or two, so that's been our process.
The expectation, I'm pretty sure in the rules, it says that every board member shall be on committees. But which committees they're on really depends on whether there's a quorum in that committee yet or not. And so I'm not aware of when Leonard was chair, when Beth was chair, I'm not aware of us as chair or myself being the one that said, you'll be on this committee. I didn't say that, and I didn't do that.
Volunteer.
So it's all volunteer.
Bill, are you saying that this committee shouldn't necessarily be just the chairs of the individual subcommittees? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I mean, I think that this isn't a problem as long as we can all agree and we don't have more people vying for these positions than others. But because I think it's the chair's decision, the final decision to how to allocate these, and there is a potential that you want to have, 4 people want to be, or 5 people want to be on the same committee. The chair has to make a decision about who will be appointed to those committees. Now, it may never come to that, but but that's the option of the chair. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
So,
but in order for, to my way of thinking anyway, I would make the case for the committee chairs, whoever they are, because the committee picks them themselves. I don't think anybody new is precluded. That I think that it makes sense for the subcommittee chairs to be on this coordinating committee, because that's the whole point, is to get input from the whole board. And I think that the best way we can do that is to do that through the committee process. So I think that's strongest, but if you have other suggestions, I'd be glad to hear them.
Chair Fine, I have some comments.
Sure.
The new kid on the block. I think that I've had a couple of comments. One on the Personnel Committee. Does the Personnel Committee have open meetings?
No. Well, we have open meetings and then we go into closed session. So it's a
Right.
personnel matter.
So it seems to me that with the Personnel Committee and possibly a welcoming committee, that we wouldn't have to have committees. That at a meeting, we could decide that for this year, Board Member Cruz is going to be the responsible person for coordinating the personnel action, but we still follow the open meetings publishing and recording requirements, and the same thing for a welcoming committee. One person, because we're going to get a whole bunch of committees here, and this isn't a very big board. The other thing is, I think as long as you have a representative from each subcommittee on this new committee, that meets what you're trying to do. It may assist the chair in not having additional responsibilities of another committee.
Okay.
So I would think that's what Board Member Cass was addressing, was that maybe we could have other persons that
Oh,
are
so
on those committees.
I see. So instead of having the chair of that subcommittee, we'd have a representative from that subcommittee. Is that
That's
what you're saying?
correct. That's
Okay,
correct.
and the committee can decide who that is. That's fine. As long as it's the same person and it makes a commitment to do it, because otherwise, if you're changing horses each time, then the mission of communication enhancement might be deterred. And so I would rather that, I agree with your logic. That's fine. If the chair doesn't want to serve, they can, of the subcommittee, then they can appoint somebody else on their committee who wants to do that, as long as that person is representing the subcommittee. That makes sense, Jim. Thank you. Did you have anything you wanted to add? Okay, all right. Anybody else?
We should yield our time to our.
Yes, sir.
Chair Fine, just to quickly address a question that was made in passing. The policies and procedures adopted by the board provide that the chair shall appoint subcommittees subject to the approval of the POB.
Subcommittees, but not necessarily the chair. So in other words, agree that there is going to be a committee, but is there anything that requires the chair to say you will serve on this committee or that committee?
Chair Fine, no.
Okay. All right, so if we're done discussing this, is there anything left? Does that satisfy, is what Mr. Larson said satisfactory to you? Okay, so then I am going to make a motion that we establish a coordinating committee, and that on that committee would be the chair of the board and representatives, the chair or their designee for the outreach committee, the case review committee, and the policy committee. Did I get it all? Okay. Can I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
The proposed duties that are listed in the document that's provided to the board, is that consistent with what the subcommittee will do?
I'm sorry, I don't have that. Where is it? Oh, here. This is not, I'm not prepared to vote on that.
Well, I think we would create.
I think the committee can decide that, okay? And with this input, that's great, but I don't want to weigh this part down. Does that work for you guys?
Yes,
Yeah, I think the motion as made establishes the committee. I think after the committee's established, it establishes,
establish its own
it does
role.
what it's supposed to do. I
Right.
mean, it's up to the committee to then carry that out in the general sense that it was created, I think.
Mr. Larson,
So-
do you have any objection to that?
Chair Fine, no, I don't have an objection to it. It's just that it seems like we say, okay, we're going to have this committee, and then the committee's going to decide what the committee does. And I'd like to have a general sense of more.
Oh, well, I thought I
exactly what
said that
the
in my
committee is gonna
opening
be doing.
remarks.
Well, maybe I didn't catch it, but so I guess we would have, when the committee, I guess I would ask that when the committee comes up with their purposes, that they bring it back to the board.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
So what I said, just to recap, is that this is really about enhancing communication between board meetings and between the committees and the full board. And that's the purpose of it. One thing for sure needs to be to establish the agenda for the next board meeting so that everybody has input into that piece, and that identifying the areas in which there's in between committees, that and how that's going to be handled. So that's really the core of things, and communication between them all is my thought. Okay, so if you're okay with that, we had a motion and a second, and we all said there was no objections. Do you have an objection? Okay, so the motion has passed, correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, we're getting something done here. Okay, now we go back to discussion item A. We need to have, there has been some identification of a problem between the ordinance, I believe, and the CASA, as far as when the election of officers for this body should occur. We have been doing it as we thought we were going to do it this time, and we discovered this problem. Somebody smarter than me discovered this problem, and Mr. Jackson, I understand you, I want to get to this obstacle first before we talk about this next election.
Yes, Chair, fine. A minor correction, the conflict is not between the ordinance and the CASA. It is between, it's a potential conflict between the ordinance and the policies and procedures.
Okay.
And out of the two of those, of course, the ordinance would control, but we would want the policies and procedures to match. So what the ordinance provides is that officers shall be elected in the month of March of each calendar year or upon vacancy of an office to fill the remaining term. Now, the policies and procedures also say that the POB shall select the chairperson and vice chairperson at the first meeting in the month of March of each calendar year or upon vacancy of an office to fill a remaining term. The chairperson and vice chairperson shall serve at the pleasure of the POB until March 1st of the next year or until their successors have been selected. And I think that March 1st is what gave rise to the election of the officers in February in prior years. Although, again, that language is disjunctive. It may be that the board may want to consider taking that provision and saying that the chairperson and vice chairperson shall serve at the pleasure of the POB until their successors have been selected. That would require a rulemaking at a meeting with 14 days advance notice and so on.
I believe it also says that the chair shall not serve more than 1 year. And if I were to serve till next month, it would be more than a year. So that's why we've been doing it in February. That's been consistent throughout. So what do we need to do to proceed this evening with our election?
What we need to do this evening to proceed with an election would be, well, it's tricky because the ordinance calls for the election in March. And the ordinance also says that the POB shall elect one of its members as chairperson and one as vice chairperson, who shall hold each office for 1 year and until their successors are elected. So I don't think that it would be contravening the ordinance to have the elections in March, even though.
Can we have the election here and have it begin in March? Is there a conflict there?
It would conflict with the language.
Because that's what we've been doing.
It is. It would conflict with the language in the ordinance that specifies that the election is in March. Now, that doesn't become an issue unless somebody wants to challenge the validity of an action taken during that uncertain period, which could create potential litigation risk.
Right now, I am so glad I'm not a lawyer, honey. I cannot tell you how grateful I am. Just, what's the bottom line? What do we need to do here?
Chair Fine, I have a question.
That would work, yeah.
I think I read in the procedures, our policies and procedures, that we can suspend some of those policies and procedures temporarily. And would it be, if so, would it be possible to suspend the requirement that says, at least temporarily, in this instance for the March 1st problem, conduct the election in March like we're in compliance with the ordinance, and then review our policies and procedures to make sure we don't have those conflicts in our policies and procedures that we control and not that the city council controls.
Chair Fine and Member Larson, that is certainly an option. Another option that Director Harness suggested that the board may also want to consider is that the chair can vacate and
Oh, perfect.
and then there would be And then there would be 1 month service for the new chair, and then elections again in the March meeting.
1 month, I don't, what would happen?
So
If I vacate today,
if you vacate today, there will be an election today. And then whoever is elected will preside over the remainder of the meeting.
okay.
And then in the March meeting, there will be an election as required by
That
the
sounds clean
ordinance.
to me. That sounds clean.
Chair Fine. Shouldn't we do all of our work first and then hold elections where you vacate afterwards, and then we'll have a
Yes.
gap from this meeting to the next meeting? Would that
Can,
work?
can we have the election first and then I vacate and then,
Or just have all of our regular business done now, and then she vacate at the end of the meeting?
oh, okay, yeah,
Chair Fine and Member Cruz, that
that would make sense.
would make sense, yes.
Okay, so that means that we would move item 8A to the end of the agenda. Does that work?
Chair Fine, yes, that does work.
Okay, can I have a motion that we move item 8A to the end of our agenda this evening?
I so move.
Second.
Second, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed, same sign? Okay, all right. Let me jump on that one. Okay. Consent agenda. Mr. Waits.
First of all, in the administratively closed cases, what I want to do differently tonight is possibly have a discussion on the discussion that we had during our meeting. There was 3 or 4 items that we discussed that had some validity, and I want to make sure that we have that conversation here tonight. And the first one, on the administratively closed cases, there was 3, 2040-17. There was a question whether the policeman driving, the issue was the policeman was driving too fast on I-40. And supposedly, the supervisor talked to the officer in question, and the question we have, the question that came up, what evidence do we have that the supervisor actually talked to that officer, and it wasn't part of the final complaint, okay, or final recommendation. So. Mr. Harness.
Chair Fine, Board Member Waits, if you would like me to change that letter to state specifically that that we communicated with the command staff and that was passed along to the field supervisor, and the field supervisor spoke with the officer and counseled the officer, I can put that language in there, but that's what happened, and I have no doubt that I'm not going to call into question the integrity of the field supervisor when that field supervisor responded to our request.
I think it was more based on what we're presented and what we're reading. So if you can add that, that's not a problem. I mean, it's just a question of whether he had that conversation or not, and how was it recorded. Okay. The second one, you agree with that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Second one was 245. That's.
I should also point out that that case isn't on the agenda until next month.
Oh, that's the one that was on the, that's the
So,
wrong.
That's why
This is
the rest of the board is confused as to why it's not
Okay,
on the agenda.
yeah. I think overall.
That was part of my notes.
I think that overall, what we saw in the administratively closed cases was cases in which we have a complaint about an officer. There were lots of them about speeding. In one case, there was an officer who was going to a SWAT situation, so clearly the policy allows for that, to be able to communicate with people. But there's cases that are coming to us that they're being administratively closed because we don't have a way to verify one way or the other. It's a he said, she said, that we don't know. If you talk to the supervisor, that's one thing. But there were several cases in which the police officer, somebody's calling in. Oh, and the other part is more significant than any of that is that the person who is complaining isn't willing to talk to our investigators subsequently, which means that you may not have any, you may have she said, he said, but she bails out of the once they make the complaint. So there's some problems with administratively closed cases that can't be investigated because the complainant isn't going anywhere and isn't going any further, isn't willing to ask, and won't answer calls, won't answer letters, those kinds of things. So I think we just as a committee wanted to share with the board that we are concerned about that and the amount of resources it takes from the staff. If the person is not willing to follow through, and maybe we need the monitor or the DOJ to tell us something more about this, but there's resources going into investigating these things that could be better used on something else where we have somebody who's willing to work with us. And so we can register the complaint, we can get the data that we get out of it, but there's really no point in the staff absorbing so many resources to work on these cases, and there's quite a number of them.
Right.
So that's what we noticed.
Yeah, and the other thing we noticed too, and that was consistent, is that the anonymous complaints, there wasn't enough information, and when our staff reached out to them, there was no follow-up. We couldn't follow up because it don't have the name, the phone number, or anything like that. So that was a consistent problem that we were seeing with all the cases. Mr. Harness?
Yeah, Chair Fine, Board Member Waits. Yes, obviously, it's difficult when we receive anonymous complaints, even though some of them aren't truly anonymous because they will say anonymous, but then they'll give us their email address or they'll give us a phone number. And so then the question is, where do we respect their request for anonymity, or do we continually try to pursue more information from them? And I've taken the position that we will try to develop as much information as we can, and if we can develop information and investigate a case, we will. As it relates to these driving complaints and the driving issues, we are no longer going to be receiving the 311 calls. Those are now being directed to the RTCC. And we will be putting in place a system so that driving complaints that come to us through our normal complaint line will be filtered through 311 so that all of those types of complaints are sent through one conduit, and then the department has the resources to look up the vehicle numbers if there happens to be one, and assign the task to the command and to the field level, and we won't be involved in those any longer,
So
unless it becomes a critical policy violation that we would need to investigate.
Okay. That's an important point that you bring up, Director Harness, because we did not agree to take the 311 driving calls that the previous police administration had forwarded to us without our knowledge or consent and agreement. And so we were all of a sudden getting all these calls. So that may be part of it as well. But I think there is something to be said for the person who files a complaint and then is not willing to talk to you after that. We have to put a red flag in that, a pin in that, so that we realize that it's absorbing resources without much result. And I would like to make sure that's on our list of things to talk to the monitor and the DOJ about.
Well, Chair Fine, the concept behind accepting anonymous complaints
Oh, no,
is...
it's not just anonymous, though. I mean, even...
Right. But the concept behind the anonymous complaints is the data that you can cull from the anonymous complaints so that you can see patterns and that could highlight or red flag. We will continue to be diligent we will investigate as much as we can with or without the cooperation of the complainant, and we're duty-bound to do that, and we
Yeah.
will continue to do that.
Okay.
I just
Well-
wanted the board, I think Leonard and I both, and Valerie wanted to make sure the board was aware that we were getting lots of these kinds of things, and it's time-consuming for the staff. Sometimes, it's not saying it's not worth it, it's just, we need to be mindful of what we're spending our resources on.
And the other two cases that I was going to mention had the same issues. So with that being said, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the administratively closed cases as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Opposed?
Any opposed? They have the same rights. All right, the cases investigated. Again, we had some comments on a couple of the cases. 197-16, there was no information on the complainant with or without her complaint. We thought the cases was incomplete. That was 197-16. Mr. Harness.
Chair, Fine, Board Member Waits, I have corrected the cover letter to include the paragraph that the complainant complained that the male officer of APD inappropriately touched her, and she further complained that her property was not properly handled by the department.
Okay. Again, what I'm doing is going over the questions that we had on those cases. And the next one is 148-17. The complaint itself exceeded the 120 days, and basically that was all our fault, correct?
Chair, Fine, Board Member Waits, I believe in that case the investigation was not commenced in time to retrieve the video, which expired within 120 days.
Okay.
And yes, it was our backlog that caused the video to not be available.
Okay. Again, most of the cases we agreed in the findings, but noticed a trend of complaints, the complainants not being cooperative. So that's an issue that I'm sure is going to be an ongoing an issue. So with that being said, I make a motion that we accept the cases investigated as presented.
I second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed have the same rights? Okay. On the serious use of force cases,
Non-concurrence first.
oh, I don't have that one in there. 156.
Now they're mixed up. Just a second. Wait a second. Here it is.
Okay.
No, don't worry about this. This is the one where the,
Did we accept this one or not?
yes.
Okay. I'll just make a
That's
motion.
the one you just talked about.
Yeah, I'll just make a motion on that. On the non-conformance
Yeah,
case,
this is the one where the,
156-17, I make a motion that we accept it as presented.
well, but Mr. Harness was concerned because this is the one where Deputy Chief Benes says that the person who was supposed to return the purse didn't do so because the officer had a family emergency and didn't check the purse into evidence. And then Deputy Chief Benes said it did not violate, the officer didn't violate the SOP. But Chief Geyer said that the officer was reprimanded for violating the policy. But you were concerned, as I recall, Director Harness, you were concerned that he didn't explain what the punishment was. The chief didn't explain what the punishment was, and you felt like we should ask for clarification there.
Yes, Chair Fine. Actually, the non-concurrence letter is from Deputy Chief Banez, in which he disagrees with the board's recommendation for a written reprimand, being that it was a Class 6 violation, first offense, which calls for a written reprimand. Deputy Chief Banez felt that he did cite that the officer had some sort of a family emergency. That was a part of our investigation, which we could not corroborate. The deputy chief, within his purview, used that mitigating factor to decide that there was a violation. However, the discipline would be a counseling and not a written reprimand. The second is the letter from Chief Geyer, which states that the department agreed with the investigators' determination that there was a violation and that the discipline was within policy guidelines. So our concerns are that the letter should specify exactly what the discipline was for that particular instance, and it should also detail the civilian's right of appeal of the chief's decision. I think that the complainant should know that it was a counseling and not a reprimand, or in the case of a suspension, a suspension. Otherwise, how does the civilian who's complaining know what to appeal if it just says that discipline within the guidelines? So I think that the problems as we discussed them were that the discipline should be detailed and that the appellate rights for the complainant should be
Part of the letter.
Part of the letter as they're specified in the oversight ordinance, because that appeal would go to the chief administrative officer of the city. It would not come to us.
So just to be clear, there are two appeals processes that are available to someone who files a complaint. One is an appeal process for our findings, and that would come to us as the CPOA. But if the chief of the police department administration decides that and notifies the complainant what their findings are, that appeal can go to them. With the letter that Chief Geyer sent, there was no mention of an appeal process, nor was it clear what the punishment was for the infraction. He did concur that it was sustained, but he didn't say what it was. So for those two reasons, Mr. Harness, backed by the case review committee, was saying that they need clarification. This letter needs more work. Is that your recommendation, sir?
Chair Fine, that's correct.
Okay.
So can I get a motion on that, to that effect?
I make a motion that we proceed with Director Harness's suggestion on the non-concurrent case 156-17 for the reasons he stated, and that the board back that with a vote.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, these are the ones he's going to do.
Okay. The serious use of force. Okay.
He's going to recap.
All right, Mr. Harness, the serious use of force cases?
Chair Fine, Honorable Board, as it relates to item A, I-172-16 and I-23-17, given that a voting quorum has not reviewed the Garrity materials that's set forth for these cases, it would be my recommendation that these be tabled until our next meeting.
So let's be clear about this. Mr. Harness and I have discussed this. And for those of you who are new to the board, which is most of you, we have only done this a couple of times. So I want to be real clear about, and I want the public to understand what the difference is and why we would go. We have reviewed the case itself. The Garrity materials are the materials, the sworn statements of the officers who were involved in these incidences. And that, because they're American citizens and they have a right to not incriminate themselves. These materials, but yet their job requires that they do a sworn statement. It's kind of a catch-22. So that has, in a Supreme Court decision, tell me if I've got this wrong, but in a Supreme Court decision, that was held that that information could not be used by others, but only by the police department. Is that right?
Chair Fine, that's
privilege.
a good statement of it. The rule of Garrity is that an employing agency may compel a statement, but that statement may not then be used for prosecution purposes. In practice, that means that statement needs to be kept.
Okay,
for
so
public
we
disclosure.
have argued for, one of the things that Dr. Cass talked about in the many fights we've had and arguments we've had over time, has been about whether or not this board should have access to those files. And it has been decided that we would have access to those files. Now, to be clear, we have access to, in these two I cases, we have had access to all of that, all of the remaining materials plus the Garrity materials. Mr. Harness, of course, has read all the Garrity materials. In order for us, the rules are, we can see them, but we have to go to the police station to see them. Now, for people that are on this board that work full-time, that is really hard because our access to that is not over the weekend, it's not at night. So you would have to take time off of work to go see that. And we have done that in the past, especially when we had big backlogs of cases, and we go to the Internal Affairs Office and we, under their lock and key, are able to look at that. We also can't go as a quorum. We can't go together because then we're a quorum and that's a problem, okay? So are you getting the feeling of you can't get there from here? It's a real thing for us. But all the rules that apply to this are important. And so it's important that we figure out a balance to this. So initially we thought, and we acted in the following way. Each of the board members was required to go to IA to look at these Garrity materials. I just think given that we don't have nights or weekends, that's an unreasonable burden. So it seems to me that if you're going to serve on this board, on the case review committee, you have to make a commitment to see the Garrity materials. And if that's the case, that doesn't mean that the other board members couldn't see it. It just means that you don't have to see it. You don't have to go. You can look at the case and look at all of that. But Mr. Harness, when I argued that he had seen it, he said, I'm not enough. You shouldn't count on my view of it. Part of what we're doing when this is the police department interviewing its own, then we have to make sure that the right questions were asked, that it was deep enough, that it was wide enough, that it was appropriate enough. And if we don't look at the Garrity materials, we haven't done that assessment ourselves. So Mr. Harness thinks all the board members should go, I think. I think at the very least, the committee members on case review should make a commitment that whenever there's Garrity materials, we will go and see them. We didn't do that in this case, and these two cases, which is why Mr. Harness is recommending we go back. I would like an opinion from our attorney about this, and I'd like to hear from the rest of the board members about it as well.
Chair Fine, the Garrity provisions in the ordinance which permit the viewing of Garrity materials at APD, those are the product of a negotiation with an organization that didn't want any of the Garrity materials viewed. Going back to the earlier discussion when we were talking about the subcommittees and why they're not subject to the Open Meetings Act, although they do comply with it, the Case Review Committee is a fact-finding committee, and if the committee members view the Garrity materials and then report back to the board as a whole, which would be done in closed session as provided for.
Well, only if we called out the Garrity materials, which we couldn't do anyway.
Well, but in order to report back to the board as a whole on what those materials contain, if the board wanted to inquire, then that discussion would
Then
take
that,
place.
just
in
the
closed
Gary
session.
part of that, not the case.
Sure,
Okay.
fine, correct.
Okay. So I'd like to know what the rest of you think about this.
Well, from a logistical standpoint, I agree with you that it's difficult if you work full-time to do that. But actually, I did that today because I don't work full-time, and I wanted to sort of exercise the system and see how it worked. And it can be done fairly easily, but I think this is another area where we need to help out each other on the board by creating the training necessary, which isn't all that difficult, but it's not obvious unless you go through the process. But if going through the process, and if you stick to just the Garrity materials, the file may be this thick, but the Garrity materials are only a few pages. So it really should only take less than half an hour to review. I think we spent about a half an hour reviewing the two cases that were made available to us. So it's a process that I think can be accomplished by all the board members with some effort, but I think we can aid that process if we explain and make it,
Well,
make these materials accessible.
Let's hear what others think. Thank you, Dr. Cass.
I feel it's, at least for me, it's a challenge to get down here during the day. It would be nice if I could do it on the weekends or at nights, but that privilege is not afforded to me. So I would depend on whomever would review the cases on the board or in the committee to trust them in their review. Or if we could go into closed session, I could ask them questions. But I need some help on being able to see some of those materials. Sometimes.
Chantel, what do you think?
I think that the idea of everybody being able to get down and see them is, like you said, an unreasonable expectation. But I also think that we are volunteers. We have chosen to serve on this board and to serve this community, and probably that expectation and the confines should be made known before somebody joins the board. But if you are on this board, probably you ought to make the effort as often as possible to review that material.
Valerie?
I have no problems going and viewing it, but I understand people need to work, people have other commitments. And so I think we, as a board, we need to step forward and help them and give them the information and what our findings are.
In closed session, you mean?
Yeah,
Talked
closed
about
session, yes,
that. Okay. Mr. Waits?
Well, I agree with Chantel. We made the commitment, and I was on the task force, and that was one of the major things or main things that we fought for was the Garrity, to see the Garrity information. So I agree. We've got to be committed to go do that. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Hermijo?
I agree with Eric. It is difficult to get away working full-time. I have to take vacation. So if I took an hour here and an hour there, to get here, it impacts my family. And the time, the getting back and forth also impacts. So I agree. I think if we did it in closed session, I would be amenable to that. That would give us the opportunity, but also if we didn't, the trust is there with the other board members that I feel comfortable with that.
Mr. Larson?
I went today with Board Member Cass and reviewed some Garrity material and found the department very open and ready to make it accessible. So it was a very easy process for us to do that, and there wasn't a lot of material. I am retired, so I can do it. So I understand the other board members' constraints. I'd like to hear from Director Harness how many he feels need to look at it. Because if we had some standard that said if there's Garrity material in a case, we want at least 5 or 6 board members to look at it.
Yeah.
Then we could meet that requirement, and we could adopt it and meet it by if Board Member Cruz can't get there, I'll be glad to go for him.
Okay.
Also, one of the cases we reviewed, it was perfectly obvious to both of us that it was unnecessary to read the Garrity material in that particular case. So I believe there are certain cases that will cry out that they don't need that review. And maybe we should address that at a later time. But I think that if we just set that standard, and I'd ask you, Director Harness, what you think of that.
Chair Fine, Board Member Larson, I understand that the restrictions for those of you that work. However, this was a hard fought for ability for this board to be able to review those materials. And so my preference would be that everybody review the Garrity materials, because each one of you has your own perspective when you're reviewing materials. Beyond that, if the board is comfortable having a committee review the Garrity materials and then report back to the full board, that's certainly the board's prerogative. I could not disagree more that there's going to be a picking and choosing of reviewing of Garrity materials because I'm not comfortable establishing that line because each of these cases needs to be treated equally and properly and all the materials reviewed.
Okay. Chelsea, do you have anything you want to add?
I think we should all review the materials. Different people are going to remember different facts and see different things, and it's really important material to review.
Okay.
I think we should have a rule that at least requires everyone on the case review committee to review the materials, but generally speaking, I think we should all be looking at them in each case with a very few exceptions. I mean, I understand that there may be logistical challenges, and I'm sure there could be, you know, from time to time, it could be okay to excuse a certain member based on something like that in a particular case, but I think the aspiration should be for all of us to review all materials.
Well, what I'm hearing is that the barrier is for those people who work full-time. So it seems to me that we could resolve this if we could have access at night or over the weekend. And if we can request that be considered by the police department, that would make it possible for all of us to do it. That's the real issue, is the access for those who work full-time. And so I don't think there's anybody on the board that doesn't want to do this. It's just it is why we signed up, but I think that it's a barrier that is significant to several board members. So I would make that request of the police department. And perhaps Deputy Chief Garcia, you could bring that, discuss that with your peers and decide whether that's an option for us to do, because that would solve the problem if you can do that. Otherwise, we're going to have to discuss what we're going to do. I mean, I think Mr. Larson's idea of, at minimum, the committee, and this is what I'm hearing, at minimum, the committee and two more would be quorum. But I'd rather make it available for everybody on the board to do. So do we have a possible solution for that? Shall we discuss it, Mr. Deputy Chief Garcia? Shall we discuss it? What do you think? Yeah, we'll still have to stage it.
Chair, fine. Yeah, I can bring that up to the chief.
Okay.
We'll talk to the chief about it, and we'll come up with some type of resolution for the board.
I would appreciate that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So for these two cases, we are tabling them till next month, until everybody has a chance to read the Garrity materials. And the way you do that is to make arrangements with Lieutenant Garcia right there. Do you want to give them your contact information so they know how to reach you? We can include it with the minutes or something. Okay, so you're not telling everybody on television how to call you 500 times? Okay, so that's for the two I cases. Now, Does that satisfy you, sir? Do we need a motion to table them? We do. Make a motion.
I make a motion that we table I-172-16 and I-23-17
And I second.
Until March.
until March.
Until March, okay.
And I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay.
Chair Fine, I did have one question. Is the logistics of it, can we all go, we cannot have quorum, so
Right.
half can go, half cannot.
Right.
Can we go before the meeting when we have to vote on this, walk on over to APD and do it before the meeting?
But you just have to make arrangements with her
Okay.
to do it.
So
And
there's
yes.
not a set time, part of the day where you
No,
can
no,
only?
no, no, we just want to know that we can call her and make a time that works for us
Okay.
individually. We can make a time. And those of us who are retired, just to be kind, would do it during the day if we could. All right? Sirs, is there anything you want to bring up? No.
No.
Okay. Mr. Harness, then would you continue with the item 11B?
Certainly, Chair Fine, although the meal has arrived if you want to take a
Oh.
break.
Okay, so we need a motion to adjourn for a dinner break, and we will be back just as quickly as we can. I need a motion to adjourn.
That's our motion.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Getting proclamations.
Okay. I'd like to call this meeting back to order.
I make a motion that we call this meeting back to order.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We are at item 11B, the cert cases.
Chair Fine, Honorable Board, C 2016-23. On May 24th of 2016, members of the Violent Offender Task Force Southwest Investigative Fugitive Team, pursuant to the Presidential Threat Protection Act of 2000, located a wanted subject at 312 Western Skies Drive, Southeast number 1. Detective P of APD was working with this task force at the time. The subject, Mr. Montoya, was an escapee from pretrial release. He had been in federal custody. Mr. Montoya was assigned to a halfway house with ankle monitoring. The ankle monitor was cut off and he did not return or report back to the halfway house. Therefore, an arrest warrant was issued. At 312 Western Skies, number 1, an entry team made their approach and entered the apartment with keys provided by the subject's girlfriend. The entry team made multiple verbal announcements that the team had a warrant for his arrest and to come out from cover with his hands empty. The team searched the apartment and located the subject concealing himself behind the master bedroom closet. He did not comply with the team's demands. Instead, he began firing a handgun at members of the team. Members of the team, including Detective P, returned fire. Detective P discharged his APD-issued rifle. During the initial gunfire, members of the team got separated. This initiated an APD SWAT call-out in order to extract some of the members of the team from the apartment. The APD SWAT team was successful in extracting all the members of the team and found the subject deceased in the closet. This case was presented to the Force Review Board on October 11th of 2017. It presented some issues of first impression for the Force Review Board. And I'm going to go to my notes. The officer was operating under a memorandum of understanding which was initiated by the Albuquerque Police Department in September of 2008. Per the department's MOU, any member of the task force would operate under the U.S. Marshals policies and would also operate under APD policy. So when we discussed this at the Case Review Committee, I was discussing this without having access to the file, so I was trying to recall all of the details. So this case was investigated under both the task force use of force policy, which was provided to APD, the policy, and it was investigated in conjunction with APD's use of force policy. The use of force was found to be in policy.
Which policy?
It was found
Both?
to be within policy for both use of force policies, both APD's and the task force. However, the Force Review Board did not review the entire incident because the Force Review Board also reviews tactics, supervision, and equipment. So the Force Review Board only voted on the use of force and did not vote on the entire incident because the officer was operating with this task force. So, with that, the CERT detective requested, the Critical Incident Review Team detective that presented the case to the Force Review Board requested that these MOUs be examined in conjunction with the settlement agreement to see if, in fact, these memorandums of understanding were in compliance with the settlement agreement. During the discussion, the command staff at that time said that there were no officers operating under these task forces and these memorandums of understanding at that time. I can't speak to whether or not they're operating under those MOUs at this point.
So do you mean at that time means at the time of this case?
In October, when this case was at the Force Review Board.
Okay.
So the use of force was found to be within policy. It was further requested that the city attorney and the department review all of the MOUs that are in place or were in place to make sure that they are compliant with the settlement agreement. I do not have any results as to that review, but I concurred that the use of force was within policy. So I stand for questions on this case.
Okay, so there was a miscommunication because at the time of our Case Review Committee meeting, we did not have access to these materials. We had our notes, that's it. And so, Mr. Harness, the software that you used to review these things was down at that time. So at the time, what we thought we were dealing with was that the MOUs were not available and therefore the case couldn't be reviewed. And you're saying now that you've had a chance to look at it, that's not the case. They did review and they did find that the officer operated within policy, APD and the U.S. Marshal.
Chair Fine, yes. The use of force was reviewed under both policies, under
Okay.
the U.S. Marshal's policy, which was provided a copy to the CERT investigator, and it was reviewed in conjunction with APD's use of force policy. And the use of force was found to be within policy. The further discussion, because of it not being a full Force Review Board review, because
Of the equipment and
of
tactics.
the equipment and tactics, such as there was no recording, because the marshals do not equip their agents with on-body recording devices, so there were no recordings. Those aspects were not reviewed by the Force Review Board.
So there's lots to learn here. And I think it's important that the community come along with the police department as they figure out how this should work. So let's take the example of video cameras. If you say that the police officer, the APD officer, is operating by APD policy and also by the U.S. Marshal policy, well, there is a difference in that the officer is not using their camera. So those two things are not congruent. So if you say they've met the standard, but the standard for the Marshal Service usurps the APD policy based on cameras, let's say, or perhaps other things, how is it that how do you and your staff judge what happened relative to this? How do you judge it, and how does the FRB judge it?
Chair Fine, the board voted not to review those aspects of the case.
The FRB?
And that's yes, the Force Review Board voted to not review those aspects of the case, and it recommended a full review of the MOUs and to see where, in fact, there may be federal policy that conflicts with APD's obligations under the consent decree.
Okay, and what is your expectation about that information going forward in terms of time? Do you?
Chair Fine, I have no concept as to what happened with this review based upon all of the changes at the department.
Well, I'm not just talking about this review. I'm talking if they're going to look at all the MOUs and all of that stuff for okay, so perhaps when APD does its report, we can ask that question. But for this case, you're saying that you found them to be in policy for APD's policies.
Chair Fine, that's correct.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
At the CERT meeting on October 11th, where this was reviewed, there's in the minutes it says there's a lot of discussion about whether the MOUs were actually available, and this is what, and they did find that the MOU were 10 years old, and the details of the MOUs were not available at that time, and I'm wondering if this isn't a policy flag that we should weigh in on, or at least take a look at, as to whether there's a APD policy that says, you know, what is the APD policy? I think that deals with creating MOUs with other agencies. And
Chair Fine, Board Member Cass, I think that's exactly what the board was requesting. Not only what is the policy entering into these memorandums of understanding, but how does APD enter into these agreements and live up to its obligations under the consent decree? Because there are conflicts between federal law and state law that could put APD outside the bounds of the settlement agreement.
But absent the consent decree, it seems to me there's still an issue with respect to whether APD, or how APD enters into MOUs with other agencies. I mean, that wasn't part of their, in 2008 when they wrote an MOU with this agency, the consent decree didn't exist. And so there's still, it seems to me there's an issue outside of whether it's in compliance with the CASA or not.
Chair Fine, Board Member Cass, certainly, and that's an issue that needs to be resolved with the department and city legal, because city legal is in consultation when those MOU are drafted.
And I think the germane point is that when they come to a conclusion about this, I'd like to know what the timeline is for it, but when they come to a conclusion that we need to understand it, so that our job doesn't get clouded in this process. Does that make sense, Dr. Cass?
Yes, I mean, I think this, I would just like to raise the issue of whether this is something that ought to be made more visible to the public about how APD, what MOUs they enter into, who they enter into with, and what the details are. I think that's the issue. I just think it should be an issue that is brought to more public attention, and I think that's our job.
Uh-huh. And I think that's where we're going. Yes, sir.
Chair Fine and Dr. Cass, in response to your question, there is a SOP entitled Contracts / MOUs for Law Enforcement Services, and I wanted to flag it for you for the policy subcommittee. It is 3-22.
Does anybody else have any questions about this? Can we stick a pin in this and remind us what you've learned at our next meeting about that, what's transpired?
Chair Fine, sure, I certainly can inquire.
Okay. No, are you, do you want us to make a motion on each one?
Chair Fine, yes, please.
Okay. Want to make a motion?
Chair Fine, I make a motion that we accept on 2016-23, what's the motion?
As it's written.
As
it's been presented to
Okay,
us.
as it's been presented. Thank you.
Second.
I'll second.
Yeah, okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay.
Chair Fine, Honorable Board Members, C 2016-69. This incident happened October 22nd of 2016. Officers G and L were dispatched to 9143 San Nicolas Northwest regarding a domestic dispute. An anonymous person called the police and stated that his girlfriend told him via telephone her brother, Michael, was at her mother's house and was causing a disturbance. Michael had threatened to kill his mother. Michael had guns in the house and possibly sells drugs. They were given a vehicle description of a Chrysler Sebring, white in color. Prior to the officer's arrival, the mother was removed from the house by the daughter and transported to a nearby school to await for the police arrival. Officers G and L met with Ms. Pacheco. She described previous encounters with Michael to include narcotic use, weapons possession, violent tendencies, and a felony conviction. However, none of the information obtained about the incident on the date supported a warrantless arrest. Officer L did reveal that Michael Pacheco had an outstanding forgery felony warrant for his arrest. While interviewing Ms. Pacheco, the subject drove by in the white Sebring. The officers got into their car and attempted to do a traffic stop. Mr. Pacheco chose not to stop, instead drove around vehicles and made a turn from Unser onto eastbound Central. Officer L and Officer G initiated a vehicle pursuit. At one point, Officer A joined the pursuit and took up first position. As they pulled into a shopping mall, Officer A, with his vehicle behind the subject vehicle, Officer A, traveling at a slow speed, states that he observed the subject make eye contact with him, eye him up, and then with his right hand pull up a gun and point it directly at Officer A to the point where he says he could see down the barrel of the gun. Officer A had his APD-issued rifle poised on the dash of the vehicle, and he discharged one round through the front windshield, which struck the sunroof, which was open on the vehicle. The vehicle then continued its escape. It stopped momentarily to let out the female passenger, and it continued. Officers eventually were able to stop the vehicle. A nearby officer was able to get in front. Another officer was in back. The vehicle was stopped. Officer A and Officer L were able to extract the subject from the vehicle, first by breaking out the glass of the passenger side rear window and then the passenger side window, where they believed that he was attempting to reach for a gun. He was pulled from the vehicle, he was placed in handcuffs and arrested. When presented to the Force Review Board, the pursuit was found to be out of policy. Officer L and Officer G received discipline for the pursuit.
Was the pursuit authorized?
The pursuit was not authorized. The Force Review Board voted 7-2 that the discharge of the firearm into the subject's vehicle was within policy. Myself and another person on the Force Review Board voted that it was out of policy because the act of the pursuit precipitated what the officer believed to be the imminent threat. I also believe that the investigation was insufficient because there was no attempt to see what the officer could see from his squad car to the back of this Chrysler Sebring, which they had in custody, and all of the pictures are in the file, to see whether or not what the officer says is true. My perception is that there's a lot of detail that I don't believe is accurate, that somebody is going to grab something with their right hand, point it over their shoulder, and the officer is going to be able to, the subject is going to do this through the rearview mirror, and the officer is going to be able to look down the barrel of that gun. I don't believe that that can happen physically. The subject and the subject's passenger, his girlfriend, in their statements stated that the gun was raised, but it was raised toward the subject because he contemplated taking his own life. So in this case, I believe that it's appropriate that aspects of this shooting are appropriate for an internal affairs investigation.
Do you think that the driver fired his gun or misfired?
No.
The driver did not discharge his weapon.
Okay. Didn't. Okay.
But the officer didn't say he fired his weapon. He said he pointed his weapon.
Right.
Correct.
That's true.
Right.
That's true.
So you're saying it's incomplete?
I believe it's incomplete, and I'm not sure that I find the officer's statements credible.
And you're saying that the incident of the firing, the discharge of a weapon, was questionable and was the product of an illegal pursuit anyway, or an unauthorized pursuit?
That's correct. The unauthorized pursuit precipitated what the officer perceived to be the need for the use of deadly force.
Okay. So your recommendation for this board is that, that we recommend referral to Internal Affairs?
Chair Fine, that's correct.
I make a motion that we do just that.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign? Okay.
Sorry. Chair Fine, fellow board members, C 2017-1. This incident occurred on January 3rd of 2017. Officer G was dispatched to an auto theft call, which resulted in locating a stolen vehicle in the area of 9005 Volcano Road Northwest. Officers observed the subject, Mr. Candelaria, flee from said vehicle and jump a fence in order to elude police contact. A perimeter was established and the K-9 unit was requested to assist. Excuse me. Officer P, along with his police service dog, responded to the scene. After determining that the surrounding facts of the incident, the officer utilized his police service dog to conduct a yard search and located and apprehended Mr. Candelaria, who was hiding under a trailer at 9005 Volcano Road Northwest, number 6. In these K-9 unit cases, when there is an apprehension, these canines are trained to bite and hold until the subject is in handcuffs and in custody. These canines are not trained to sit by and bark and contain. They are trained to bite and hold until officers have control. So when I say that the police service dog located and apprehended, that's what I mean. There were bites that occurred. This incident was found to be within policy by the Force Review Board, and I concur. I stand for questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Any questions? Oh, go ahead.
In regards to, you say that the officers have control or in handcuffs, is it either control, like two officers holding them, or does it have to be with handcuffs?
Chair Fine, Board Member Armijo, it is in handcuffs
Okay.
and under control.
Thank you.
Chair Fine, I make a motion that we accept case 20-4. Is that 4?
No, it's 2017-1.
2017-1. As presented.
I second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. 2017-6.
Chair Fine, fellow board members, C 2017-6. Officer B was flagged down in reference to an auto theft call, which resulted in locating the stolen vehicle in the area of 50th Street and Lombardi Northwest. Once officers arrived, the vehicle left the area, eventually crashing in the area of 731 56th Street Northwest. Officers saw two occupants exit the vehicle, one later identified as Christopher Martinez, and flee, jumping fences to elude police contact. A perimeter was established and the K-9 unit was requested to assist. The passenger was caught a short time by field officers without incident. Officer W responded with his police service dog and after determining the facts, utilized his police service dog to conduct a yard search and located and apprehended Mr. Martinez hiding in a stairwell in the backyard of the residence located at 742 57th Street Northwest. The Force Review Board voted unanimously that this use of force was within policy. I concur, and I stand for questions.
I make a motion that we accept C 2017-6 as presented.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay. C 2017-8.
Chair, fine, honorable board members, C 2017-8. Officers were dispatched to 2030 Merlinda Southwest, reference a domestic violence call. Officer B was dispatched and contacted the victim, walking at Churchill and Merlinda. The victim told Officer B her boyfriend, Christopher Crespin, held her against her will for 2 days and assaulted her and cut her with a knife. There were children present during some of the assaults. Officers attempted to set up at the house at 2030 Merlinda when Crespin jumped the back wall of the house and began to run. A perimeter was set up to contain Crespin. Officer M, along with additional members of the Albuquerque Police Department, the K-9 unit, responded to assist. After determining the facts surrounding the incident, Officer M utilized his police service dog to conduct a yard search to search for Crespin. Crespin was located in a shed in the backyard of 304 63rd Street Southwest and apprehended by the service dog. The Force Review Board voted unanimously that this use of force was within policy, and I concur, and I stand for questions.
I have a question. What's the time scale for these events as they unfold? I mean, how long is it between the time when someone's on the run to when they deploy a service animal?
Chair Fine, Board Member Dr. Cass, there is quite a bit of elapsed time because they have to set up the perimeter, and then there has to be the response of the K-9 unit, and then the K-9 unit will do public PA announcements announcing that for the person to show themselves and to come out, and if they have to use the dog, then the dog is going to bite them. And they make those calls out repeatedly over a public address system. So these things take hours. It's not a matter of having something happen in minutes. They will contain the area, try to make it as concentric as possible and as small as possible. And then when they reach the area where they believe the person is, I've even seen them utilize flashbang devices prior to deploying the dog. That wasn't in this case, but they do take a great amount of time before they will actually deploy the dog for the apprehension. And then they will have a very good idea that that person is contained in that particular area.
And where is this on the scale of use of force?
Chair Fine, Dr. Cass, these are serious use of forces, and that's why they're reviewed at the Force Review Board.
Thank you.
I think it's, just a comment, I think it's a great blessing that we have trained dogs to do this. It saves a lot of lives and is an alternative to shooting, which is wonderful. So having gone through the academy, which we'll get to later, I really appreciated learning about the canines and their skill and their trainer skill. So we need to have a motion on that one. Did we do it already? Oh, we didn't.
I did. I make a motion that we accept the case number 2017-8 as presented.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay. Do we have any Garrity materials other than the two we just talked about before that are coming behind them?
Chair Fine, no, not at this time.
Okay. Reports from subcommittees. Outreach Committee, Mr. Armijo.
Our committee met on January the 20th for a little over a couple hours. We had several guests. Eric Olivas, he's the chair of the Northwest CPC, and our new board member, Jim Larson, sat in also. Also in attendance was Director Harness, committee members Dr. Cass, AKA Bill, Valerie St. John, Chantel Galloway, and CPO staff. We had a very lively discussion and talked about our mission statement and goals and objectives. There was much discussion on the mission statement, and Amanda placed key points on the board for all members to take back and develop a mission statement and send her their idea of a mission statement. All members, including Mr. Larson, submitted some great ideas for our mission statement. We will meet again on February 20th for a couple of hours to finalize our mission statement and hopefully capture our goals, objectives, and timelines. And I realize this is a long process. However, the topics that we're dealing with require a very well thought out process, I believe. I think we all believe that, as they'll be the guiding light in the future for the Outreach Committee, the POB, and the citizens of Albuquerque. I sent an email to the committee providing me with the dates and times for all of the 2018 meetings, and this will be part of the agenda in our February 20th meeting. So we can have all the dates for 2018 down pat, just like the POB has. Also, I personally met with Commander Michelle Campbell and Lieutenant Jennifer Perez on January 25th to meet them and to go over information regarding the Outreach Committee and kind of an overview of the Outreach Committee. And they are very committed to working with us, and told me that if there was anything that we needed from them to go ahead and ask, I was given cell numbers and direct communication with them. And outreach members, did I miss anything?
You done, sir? Okay, any questions for the Outreach Committee? Okay. Policy and Procedure Review Subcommittee, Dr. Cass.
So we met, I think the 18th, is that right? We, at that point, at the meeting, I presented a model for policy development, which I found on the web. There's an abundance of policy development models, and they all look a little bit alike, and I wanted to get something out in front of the committee in order to, make the point that has been attempted to be made in the past by Dr. Brown, and that is that policies should contain some measure of, some measurables, so that you can test your policies against, to see whether they're really working. And so that was, there was a short discussion about that, and then we proceeded to other business. Other business was that the SOP 341 was submitted to the chief, as Director Harness noted, and we heard that's now in process with APD. The committee also discussed changes to 344 and SOP 34, and because of the flux of the APD's process, we tabled the changes, but essentially got through those changes, and these were changes that were written substantially by Diane McDermott of the staff. So again, I think this is a process that works for implementing the requirements of the ordinance. That's what this has primarily been focused on. We had as guests Commander Michelle Campbell and the civilian employee Jolene Luna, who are going to be in charge of the rewriting of APD's policy on policies. And there was quite a bit of discussion there, and I think we came to some understanding about cooperating on how to conduct business in the future, and I think we'll hear more from Attorney Schmiel for the city. tonight, as he's got, he has 352, I think he has a responsibility, and we'll let him talk about that. I'll leave it at that. I think he can explain better what's going on with 352, but I think the noteworthy news is that APD representatives were here. They were there. They came as a result of a chance encounter I had with Deputy Chief Garcia at the DOJ meeting. I mentioned that we were meeting, having a policy meeting the next day, and he got representatives from APD over there who were appropriate to be there. So I think that's good news, and I don't see anything but good news there. So that's all I really have for policy committee.
Did you not want to talk about the ordinance changes in the meeting?
If you want to do that now, we can do that. Since
you wanted to wait till Julia?
City,
Yeah.
from
Okay.
Mr. Moya, I thought I would wait until he
Okay,
he
good
gave his
idea.
report.
Okay. Case Review Subcommittee, Leonard, you've done a lot already.
I really don't have any more than,
Except there were no appeals. No appeals, right?
we didn't have any appeals, so. I don't have any more to state about the case review. It was quite a bit. We had to have a couple meetings to get everything done, so I think we did a pretty good job this week, so thank you very much. Our next meeting is going to be February 27th. And that's all I have.
Okay. Personnel, Mr. Cruz.
Yes, ma'am. I got a hold of Mary Scott from City Finance, and she informed me that we are unable to give Director Harness any increases because it's not specifically outlined in his contract. She said the last increase that he received was tied to a cost of living increase, and that was not a part of the increase that we had identified for him. If we choose to give him an increase in the future, that we need to amend the contract, either amend it or when we go back to renegotiate, include that in that contract. And it also would be dependent on the type of funding that we're funding Director Harness with. So I'm not sure on that. That would have to get with the city on what kind of funding that is, and if that funding allows us to give him increases.
Did Director Harness, were you able to visit with Helen Maestas? She was going to get us some information on this, wasn't she?
Chair Fine, no, that information would have come from the Director of HR, Mary Scott, who Board Member Cruz spoke with.
Okay, we hadn't gotten anybody to call us back, so maybe that's how you got it connected, is that Helen helped us that happen. Okay, we obviously need to work on the contract because it was certainly not our assumption that we didn't have that option, and we certainly need to fix that moving forward. Mr. Moyer, do you have any thoughts on that?
Madam Chair, Board Member Cruz, I was just going to mention in my report coming up next that maybe we should get together and I can reach out to Stephanie Yada in our office. She's our financial officer, and maybe she can help us with this and maybe have some possible solutions for this.
Thank you.
We certainly thought that we were giving him a meritorious raise last year, and that's what we said, but obviously that didn't happen. So we need to fix that. So whatever you can do to help us, we would sure appreciate. APD.
Good evening, Chair Fine, honorable board members. For the month of January, APD dispatched 44,778 calls for service. That's an increase from December of 1,246 calls. Internal cases for the month, we had 6 closed, 5 of those were investigated by Internal Affairs and 1 by the Area Command. We did not administratively close any cases, nor did we mediate any cases. Discipline imposed for the month, we had 1 training with the SOP violation related to general conduct, 2 verbal reprimands for outside employment, 3 letters of reprimand, 4 computer use, handcuffing of prisoners, and searching of prisoners. 1 one suspension of 164 hours related to conduct, submission of evidence, and supervisory leadership, and one termination related to conduct, department-issued property, tagged items, and use of APD's vehicle. Pending cases for the month of January are 22, and internal affairs cases open for the month are 7. We did issue 166 early intervention and recognition system alerts. 126 of those are for job well dones. We have some help right now to help us get caught up on that backlog, so that's why we have such a large number. 38 of those were related to use of force and 2 for vehicle crashes. And I stand for any questions.
I don't have any questions. Does
Well,
anyone?
Dr. Ring left, so.
Well,
Kidding.
I know that we had some outstanding questions for APD on the academy, and you should have received in your packets at least a copy of the training. The last meeting, Commander Collins was here and talked about getting a 9-session training for the POB members. We have now 4 members who need to be trained so they can vote on cases. And I know that the proposal we got is 2 full weekends. It's 8 to 5 Saturday and Sunday. And it would allow you to vote at our next meeting, which would be pretty awesome if we could make that happen. So I know it's different from what we talked about, but I know the person who's in charge of it is here. And anybody from APD who wants to talk about that, I'm sure it was difficult to get all the instructors and the space and all of that stuff coordinated. I know it's a hard sell to do 2 full weekends, but I think it's better than doing the impossible, which is to get everybody on the same page for 9 weeks in a row. So does anybody from APD want to talk about that training?
I believe Commander Sullivan and Anna Erickson are here.
Okay. Congratulations, I'll say, Commander Sullivan. He is now in charge of the academy, among other things, I'm sure. And we just visited. Now tell me your name again.
Anna Erickson.
Anna Erickson. And she is a former APD police officer who came back once her kids were older and ran the academy last year as a volunteer and is now raring to go. So she's had some issues with that, and we'll let you guys describe what that was and how you came to this conclusion.
So I know that with Commander Collins, we had proposed the idea of a 9-week condensed version of the Citizen Police Academy. Some feedback that we got over the last few years was that for members of this board and also the community policing councils, that the 12-week course twice a week was a major commitment when you're already doing so much. So Commander Collins and I had discussed doing a shortened version to meet those needs in a more efficient manner and focus solely on what you all need to continue doing what you're doing now. We met with a few of you. I know, Valerie, you were there, and met with some of the CPCs and determined as a group what we felt would be most beneficial in regards to what we already teach at the Citizen Police Academy. Again, to make it to where it focuses on what you need to continue to do the voting that you do. So we came up with approximately 9 sessions and had looked originally at doing 9 weeks once a week. When I started working on the schedule and trying to lay it all out, I found that it was going to be very difficult to find a night of the week that would work for all of you, as well as all the community policing councils, and the nights that they meet, it varies for each council. That's where we decided that the 2 weekends would probably work best for everybody, and that's why the change was made from that 9-week proposal to the 2 weekends.
Well, there are 4 of you that are affected by this. Dr. Cass, Chantel, Mr. Larson, and Chelsea are all affected by this? Do you have thoughts about the condensing it into 2 full weekends? You're on board. You good? You good?
Yeah, I'm
Dr.
good.
Pence?
I have a question. How many do you expect from CPCs and POB both? And is there anyone else?
We, 4 from here, and then talking with Chris Sylvan, we're still working on the numbers from CPCs. I would say a handful from there as well. I would guess at most 15 total students, but it's still up in the air, and now we're 2 weeks away, so hopefully we will know soon. Let's see. What was your other question? Sorry. Was that it?
What do you need from these 4 people? Do you need them to contact you?
Yes. You can contact me directly. I do have business cards with me if you'd like. Or you can also go to the city website, cabq.gov, and go to police department programs and look for the Citizen Police Academy. You will find the application. Some of you may have applied previously, but I am requesting that you apply again because the amount of applications we had over the last year prior to me having access to all of the applications because they're online is over 70. And so it would be a lot easier instead of going through those 70 applications by hand to just have them in the latest queue.
I think it would be a really good idea if we used your business card and we just got 4 of them to give them to Michelle.
I have some with me, so I can pass them out.
Okay, great. Michelle can take care of that. Commander Sullivan, congratulations.
Thank you, Chairperson Fine.
Thank you for this, and we're very grateful that Anna is in charge of this. Are there thoughts that you want to share with us about her wonderful efforts or this process or how anything else?
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson Fine. Just briefly, we were just discussing it, and I know some of you already been through our longer version. As you look at this schedule, if there's other things that you may have seen or heard about that aren't on this schedule, unfortunately we had to condense the regular version. If there's another program or part that you'd like to see, you can meet with Anna, and we'd be more happy to bring you in during the regular one for that section. So let us know if, like, for example, the one we brought up was K-9, because you guys were talking about the K-9. You won't get a K-9 demonstration during this weekend because we just don't have time for it. But if it's something you're interested in and something you guys would like to see, because I think it's very beneficial and it's interesting and kind of fun to watch, let Anna know, and we'll bring you guys in when K-9 comes during the regular session, and you can observe. You already have filled out the paperwork. You're considered, applicants to the academy, so you'll be fine.
So we've heard a lot about how the use of force training has changed, how it initially got started and with the CASA, and now that it's changing again. Many of us went through the training 3 years ago on use of force. So is it wise, would it be wise for us to go to either this class for that piece or to go to the regular Civilian Police Academy as we did initially? How should we catch up with you on your training with that?
Chairperson Fine, that's a good question. And obviously we're still working on the use of force and developing that training, but I think that would be an excellent decision on your part and on the entire board's part that City Attorney Schmiel is working with my people now collaboratively to create that policy. And once it's created, we will be doing all training for the entire department again. And I think it'd be great if the board actually took that updated training.
I know that all of us have talked about that, and I know there's lots of interest in that.
And it's an issue, obviously, we know that. So it's something that I can communicate with you directly, or,
Sure.
Chairperson Waits as you take over, however it works. And we'll get you guys in there. That's no problem at all. That's actually, it would be very beneficial because it's different. We're changing the policy.
And to touch on that also, when we do the use of force training for Citizen Police Academy and the traditional academy, we do a total of 6 hours, and some of you, if you took the CPA more than a couple years ago, it might have only been 3 hours. When I spoke with our instructor about the use of force training and told him what the purpose of this class is, he advised me that he would like an extra couple of hours because there's so much information. So we're looking at an 8-hour block instead of 6 hours. It would be great to have you all on the same page and the consistency there, so that, that's kind of where that comes in. But it is on a Sunday. Coming up very quickly. So.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Chair Fine, excuse me, I'd just like to thank you all both for being so responsive to this. This has been something that's been going on for years, and you guys have gotten it together, and we're very much appreciative of that. I am.
We are indeed.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I perceived a question from the legal department, and I'm curious as to what their question is.
I guess I don't understand the process. I think that the necessity for the board to apply for the Citizens Police Academy.
These four apply.
I would think that it would be simply a matter of supplying the name and a number of attendees for the board.
Can you explain why you need them to apply since it's being set up for them? The contact information, et cetera?
Yes. We conduct criminal history checks on all of our applicants. We also like to have an idea of who you are and why you're applying. It's a very simple application process. It's not a thorough background investigation.
Well, actually, we've already gone through thorough background investigation. That's already part of this, doing this.
Okay.
We have to pass that anyway. So I'm not sure if that's happened with our 4 new members. Have you filled out any paperwork that says you're willing to have them do a background check on you?
That's part of the application process for
Okay,
for
so
the POB.
that's
But
why
what-
you got that, right?
I have another question or a comment, and that is, I mean, it seems to me we're circling back to the same issue that I guess I was the one who raised about special requirement and waiver that we signed in order to do ride-alongs. And I think this kind of falls under the same category. We're taking this course because it's a requirement. We're not in the same category as citizens who want to volunteer to take this course and relinquish all their waive their rights in order to do that. So I kind of perceived that might be the issue that was being raised over here, and I happen to agree with it. And I think that any application process other than furnishing the names of people on the board who are going to be taking the course is just going to be redundant to what we've already done to apply.
Except that it is a requirement that our members pass a background check. So that is a requirement to be on this board. So that has to happen anyway.
So Chairperson Fine and Chairperson Dr. Cass, if you'd like, if you can show us, or if we know that those background checks have been conducted and they've passed them, I'm fine with waiving the additional.
I don't believe it's
application.
happened. I don't, do you know, Director Harness? It may be that it happened in conjunction with the academy.
Madam Chair, when we recommend names to the council, we run the background checks. So I have confirmation emails that everyone has passed. Ms. Galloway kind of was the last one where we did it. From when you guys applied, you filled out the background waiver and turned it in to us. Recently, with the last 2 appointees, we've kind of switched our process where we send them an email and then they kind of do it on their own, but we still receive confirmation. But
They do their own background check? You don't mean that?
no, but it's just a different kind of process where they authorize that they're going to be, that they're going to have a background check.
Okay,
but
so
I
you
can
have
pull,
one for Chantel.
Yeah, I can pull my confirmation emails that I got from HR that all the background checks are completed and
Dr. Cass,
passed.
have they done a background check on you?
I don't know, but I'm on the board.
Madam Chair, yes, everyone.
No, and I mean, I'm serious about this. I'm on the board, and if a requirement to take this academy would require a background check, and I couldn't serve on the board as a result of that, then there's an additional requirement that APD is imposing on board members, which I think is inappropriate. So that's the summary.
Mr. Jackson, can you clarify for us, is it or is it not in the ordinance or in the rules that we have to have a background check for everybody that serves on this board? I believe that's in the ordinance. That's part of the deal. So Mr. Moya, if you would contact them and let them know who you have it on already. There are other two of you are going to have to get those forms filled out.
I believe what Mr. Moya said is that they're all done. And
Oh,
he's going
I'm
to be
sorry.
able to send the confirmation that way
I
we won't
missed
need
that.
to
Okay, so would you
apply.
send all four to you? What do you need besides that?
Names.
Names and the commitment that you will be there.
Okay. Mr. Harness, can you give that information to Commander, to Anna?
Chair Fine, yes, I have polled the board and found those who are ready to attend, and I will be attending as well.
Okay. So then does that satisfy what you need, dear?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. We get confused about these things. Yes?
And Chair Fine, beyond the confirmation that the current members have passed a background check, the ordinance does require that a member of the POB pass a background check.
Yeah. And that's a good decision, I think. So I even when I volunteered for the police department years ago, I had to pass a background check for that as well. So thank you for that. I really appreciate your willingness to make this happen and happen so quickly and happen in such a way that we can, these members will be able to vote at our next board meeting on cases. And that matters hugely. So thank you very much. I appreciate the effort.
Thank you.
Deputy Chief Garcia, do you have anything you want to talk to us about or share with us?
Good evening, Chair, fine board members. Just a few things. We talked about the use of force policy that we're changing. Matter of fact, City Attorney Jeremy Smeal and I will be meeting with the DOJ and the U.S. Attorney's Office tomorrow to change the wording of the CASA so it'll allow us to investigate those in a more timely manner and develop our policy where the officers actually understand it. So we're going to change the policy there. So we're working on that pretty hard. The monitor is going to be coming to town March 12th to the 16th. Dr.
Is this the
Ginger's
mini
team.
visit?
It's the mini visit, yes. He's going to come in and he's going to meet with myself and my team to go over any questions we have and help us with his way forward, basically his plan to help us with the reset. And that week as well, we'll be having the in-court status hearing with Judge Brack. I'm not sure if you've already been notified of that.
No, but I'm sure Director Harness will give it to us in his report.
Yeah, usually, as you know, it's usually in May, but we'll be having it in March since the judge will be in town. And so instead of having it telephonically, we'll be in court in person.
Okay. Well, great. I appreciate that. It really feels good to have everybody here. I'm so grateful that you're here. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Deputy Chief Garcia, we had last meeting or the meeting before, we had talked about your policy committee, and I had asked you if you had some officers that were on the field on the policy committee, and you said you did have one. Has that grown any?
Chair, fine, board member Armijo. We're in the process right now of changing OPA, the Office of Policy Analysis, for several reasons. One, to make it more available to the public. We're going to have we're going to change the meeting to the evening hours instead of during the day, so the public in general can attend and have additional officers attend. Because a lot of the officers that can come during the day now, the younger officers who we want their input, right? They usually work in the evenings or the nighttime, so they'll be able to come during their shift, hopefully. So we're changing that whole process, but yeah, we're trying to get their input. We're working with the APOA as well to be sure and get their input and their membership input.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions for Deputy Chief Garcia? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
City Council. Mr. Moya.
Madam Chair, board members, obviously the council took action on 2 new appointments for this board. So I just want to thank Ms. Van de Venter and Mr. Larson for their commitment to serving the Albuquerque community. We have some movement on the ordinance changes. As Mr. Cass mentioned earlier, I sat in on a meeting with Councilor Benton and board members St. John and Cass and Mr. Harness And Councilor Benton was interested in sponsoring the changes to the ordinance. And those changes include the changes that were approved by the board and some other changes related to timelines that have been requested. So per the council's request, Chris Melendrez just earlier today sent out kind of a red line version of it to members of City Legal, APOA, and CPOA just for review and comments. Once this little review kind of period is done, then we can move on getting it introduced in front of council and getting it in the process to be approved by council. So I don't have kind of definite timelines for this, but our next council meeting would be February 21st. If we're unable to get it then we will look at the first meeting in March, but I think we will definitely be trying to get this in as soon as it's ready, as soon as the council is ready to introduce it.
Do we need more sponsors than Councilman Benton?
Madam Chair, Councilor Benton did suggest to everyone at the meeting, including board members St. John and Cass, that they meet with other councilors and in that maybe seek out a second co-sponsor just to kind of get some more support for it. So I'll be working with Dr. Cass to get some more meetings set up with other
Great.
city councilors.
We've been waiting for this, so thank you very much, all of you, for that effort. Is there anything you want to add, Dr. Cass?
I thought the meeting went well. I think Councilor Benton embraced the idea that we need these changes, and he suggested that he had a list of counselors that he would like us to talk to, and we kind of have a list of our own, and I think the more we talk to, the better off we are. Director Harness made a presentation of the changes and with an explanation. I thought he did a very succinct job of explaining them, and I think that went over very well. So I think all in all it was a good meeting, and I think we're moving forward now. So and I appreciate the cooperation from you and other council staff, so thank you.
Is it, I'm not used to dealing with city politics, so not in this city anyway. So I want to know if it is a good idea for us to try to set up visits with the other counselors. I mean, sponsorship being one thing, but is it a good idea or not a good idea to try to take some of their additional time to visit with the rest of them, or just leave it to the sponsors?
Madam Chair, no, I think part of this was that I was going to set up other meetings with, working with Dr. Cass with other counselors as well.
Okay.
That may be the easier way to do it, kind of have a designated 2 board members or something, go around and meet with the counselors as opposed to 9 different meetings for 9 different counselors, anything like that.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to get protocol on all that. Thank you. Mayor's office, is anybody here from the mayor's office? Do you have anything else? I'm sorry. Okay. Mayor's office, Chris, I see you're here. Do you have anything you want to add to the CPCs? Okay. City Attorney, Mr. Schmiel. Is it Schmiel? It's right. Okay. I have a friend named Schmieli, and I always want to say that. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Chair Fine and board members. Just don't call me late for dinner. I think that's probably the best rule. So I guess I can start with the flow chart that I provided, the 352. I wouldn't even call it a flow chart, but process for the policies to go through. Deputy Chief Garcia sort of touched upon the Office of Policy Analysis up to this point in time. I think it served a good purpose, but I think that purpose needs to change. Then that's the Office of Policy Analysis I was speaking about. So that'll be the point at which, sort of above that blue box, which contains Office of Policy Analysis, there's going to be a draft of a policy. So you have an existing policy, obviously, and that draft is going to be prepared by that departmental subject matter expert. So if it's tactical, if it's police pursuits, if whatever it is, that draft is prepared before Office of Policy Analysis. Now, at Office of Policy Analysis, in my mind, it should be now at this stage, and it should have always had a component of education. I think that's critical if there's going to be input. If there are going to be any recommendations, there has to be an informed recommendation. As civilians, we have difficulty coming up to speed on the why, the how, and the what, in my mind. And so that's the purpose of Office of Policy Analysis. And it's going to be in the past, and I think it was probably the first meeting that Dr. Cass went to. It was very confusing. Is there voting? If there's voting, how is there voting? And it was confusing in the past. So there's going to be structure built around the Office of Policy Analysis, and that's going to be the emphasis to the point where I believe that can generate packets, packets that are going out, not just to POB and not just to amicus, but the amicus rather, well, no, amici, but to the public. I mean, if you have a website where you're expecting recommendations to come in, and there are those people that are self-educating, then those things can go out to the extent that they don't have sort of sensitive police practices contained in them to the public, and so they can do that on their own. And it, that's what that orange box with yes.
Could we do that as well? Could we post? Would that be okay? I mean, assuming you have something you want to post on a city website, would we be able to share that with the public too?
Chair Fine, I would anticipate that being public.
On our website?
I don't think there would be any problem with that. I mean, I really just want it to be blasted out to everyone who's interested in it.
Good.
And then I'd like to just, point out the boxes to the left and the right. So you have POB access to assign SME, and then you have public comment. And I hope I'm not getting too far ahead of myself, but there's been a lot of discussion in the past about another parallel process that y'all have with POB for you to have access to subject matter experts to talk to them. So that Office of Policy Analysis will maintain that roster of subject matter experts that'll be available for the POB, so that you can have a touch point where you can reach out, have conversations, develop those recommendations, have question and answer sessions, whatever. And what I've strongly suggested is that be archived. Because you guys have turnover, the department has turnover, everyone has turnover, but the knowledge shouldn't be lost. And so what I've encouraged in this policy development process conversation is that touch point be formalized in the information that's taken from it. And so I think that's what's going to happen on the department side, and I would encourage consideration of that on the POB side, so that those conversations don't have to restart every time. And sort of as the baton is passed on your side, you can inform that next person. And then on the other side there, you have the public comment, which we want to make the ability for those external sort of, you're not necessarily going to OPA, but you want to make a comment or recommendation, rather, a formal recommendation. Those will be allowed all the way up to the Policy and Procedure Review Board. I think we have to, on the city side of things, look at how those are coming in and how realistic it is that the information we're putting out there is going to result in educated, informed recommendations from the public. So the next step in it would be the input from personnel. They would have that through Power DMS. There would be 7 calendar days. It was 15 before. Had conversations with the union, and they're fine with that 7-day period to be able to provide that, and that's required under the settlement agreement for them to have that input. It would make its way to the Policy and Procedure Review Board. So now we got rid of the SOPRC, the Standard Operating Procedures Review Committee, because we found it to be very rubber stamp. You kind of went into the SOPRC. Sometimes, you had enough people. Sometimes you didn't. So what I view that Policy and Procedure Review Board as being twofold. So you have input from 3 touch points. You have it from the internal touch point with personnel, you have it from public commentary, and you have it from POB. That's where that formal recommendation would be fed in. The first half of the PPRB would be consideration of those recommendations. And it wouldn't be that their input already before the meeting with this lack of understanding about the where, how, and the why again, because that was something I struggled with, was you'd show up in a meeting and then you'd have a redraft of a policy, and it was there, and the explanation was sort of amorphous, and you just kind of were left with that. So at the Policy Procedure Review Board, I view it as being twofold. You have that explained, and then the PPRB would vote on it. The PPRB is going to have to be reconsidered. As it stands, the PPRB is supposed to be, and I've looked back at previous iterations of the PPRB policy, and so we're going to have to sort of change that around, but it will be voted upon by department personnel and the voting members. And then if it's CASA related or settlement agreement related, it would go to y'all for 30 days. At the 15-day mark, it would go to the parties and the monitor for comment and review. And then that resolution draft, that's what I do. So what I do is I take everything from everyone and incorporate things and come up with a resolution draft, which is presented to the monitor, and then he either gives it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and then it goes, and then once we get that thumbs up, it goes to the chief for review and approval, posting on Power DMS, and then it's signed off on by everyone. Those that are not settlement agreement related would go to the review or approval by chief. That was the open question that I had, because I know we had some discussion about those non-settlement agreement related policies. So I just, I mean, that's it. That's it right there. What we'd like to, so this is just, you're the first formal presentation point for this. The hope is that I'll be able to circulate around the actual policy hopefully next week. I have a couple things going on. But once I get that out, I'm going to get that out to really everyone, the amici. We're going to have a public meeting to the extent that it's probably going to be CPCs, POB, the amici. We actually had a call today with the amici, and I'm going to get this out to them as well. So,
so if I understand this correctly, only the CASA-related policies would come to us formally, as the way this is stated right now. However, nothing in the CASA says only CASA. Nothing in the ordinance says only CASA. So if we would have access higher up in the process before PPRB on any policy, right?
right, yeah. Right? I mean, really the way I view this for POB is you have that access all the way past at 30 days in the end of the flow chart. So
well, for CASA related.
Right. And I pose this as an open question. I mean,
right.
I'll have to take it, I'll have to have discussions with the department, but I wasn't at the subcommittee meeting. I don't know what y'all think about those non-settlement agreement related policies, because there are a lot of policies, and some of them may be, okay, well, we don't necessarily need this. If it's not settlement agreement related, then, and you want to have that input, then if there's an alternate process at the end, I think that's something to be discussed. I don't think it's certainly not a closed door. It's just a question of what's behind the door.
Well, I think there's certainly a priority, at least that's my view, is that there's a priority on CASA-related policies. Mm-hmm. But certainly I wouldn't want to see us limited to just that. And I think that doesn't mean that we have to review every policy. Right. But I think that if we are engaged in the first part of the process mm-hmm. on policies that are not CASA-related, mm-hmm. And then want to find a place in which we can see policies that are reviewed, we can certainly make our own policy recommendations subsequently to that. Correct, sir?
Right, and I think, the danger is, I think we have to do some kind of triage, and I think yes, certainly CASA-related policies are an obligation. And then there's, but not every policy that APD reviews is of concern to us. And I think one of the problems is that they can generate a lot more policies than we have the capability of
exactly.
of reviewing, and we wouldn't do justice to a review. So I think somewhere in the process, and I think it's going to be a joint effort, we have to decide how to select policies that we're going to review or that might be of interest to us. And I think, as a start, it would be that we get some kind of list of policies, and I know that's produced regularly for the OPA meetings, at least it was. But we need to have a sense of whether they're important changes or not. And so somebody on the POB or some committee on the POB probably has to be a filter for that. And but that means we need to do some process development ourselves. And so in that spirit, I'd like to invite somebody to come to our next policy subcommittee meeting, which is Tuesday, by the way, so right around the corner. So if we could keep the dialogue going, I think that would be helpful.
Well, and the other feedback I would give you is that there will be a day will come when the CASA is no longer part of what we're dealing with. And I think we've envisioned, and the city council has envisioned, an ongoing oversight process by the POB. So when the CASA things are all tight and we're all in agreement, I think there needs to be something now that gives us a way to filter what you're looking at, and I think that's through the committee or through Ed, that you say, wait a second, we're going to bring this up. He's going to talk to Cass about it, and they're going to bring it to the committee and decide, do we want to weigh in on this one too? But I think it does triage it, and I think, I have been overwhelmed by Power DMS. I mean, I admit it. I'm knocked out by how many emails I get from them. So I think the triage is a good idea. I just wouldn't make a hard no on the rest of it. And it doesn't sound like you're making a hard no either.
Chair Fine and Board Member Cass. So first question for you, Dr. Cass, is what time is it Tuesday and where is it?
It's 5 o'clock in third floor conference room. Is that where we are scheduled? In the POB headquarters or CPOA headquarters. We have a big building downtown.
Plaza del Sol.
Plaza del Sol, right. 3 o'clock or 5 o'clock Tuesday.
Okay.
And is the conference room the third floor?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
I really want to applaud the public comment part and the inclusion of the other groups. I really think it matters, and it's a great testament to the desire to reset this whole thing. So thank you.
Chair Fine, yeah, and I really want to, the department really is going to, I believe, make the presence more robust maybe on the web. I think that would be helpful, and get more information out there. And so you're absolutely right. It's an ongoing conversation because that was a very soft no.
Yeah.
Because I
Or
just
maybe
didn't
it's
know
not
the
yet.
answer. Yeah, I just didn't KNOW the answer. So just a few other things to update you on, if it's all right. As far as the way forward, which has been talked about quite a bit. So what that is, and I don't know if I talked about it last time, but it's supposed to be. It's the replacement of the 7th report with 2 smaller reports, and then a period of technical assistance. And we've already received a week of that technical assistance in January, which would have been closer in time to our last conversation. And we anticipate Dr. Ginger and the monitoring team being here again the week of March 12 and the following week. So the filing that was anticipated and it's going to be coming was going to suspend the application of the reporting to take into consideration the fact that there were going to be these 2 other reports. The substance of those reports are a topic of ongoing conversation between city legal and the parties and the monitor. And so we're really hopeful that those are informative in a couple of different ways. There will be the filing of the compliance plan on the 14th of March. And so the logic in it is to line up these reports with that compliance plan, because that's really going to spell out the reform effort moving forward. And this is the first one, which will cover a 6-month period. So I think it's great that it's not just going to be a report that is not unguided, but not instructed. It will be instructed by, informed by progress, and that's what it's going to be. It's going to be tasks and deadlines and people responsible for delivering on those, and why and how the progress can be shown. And so the way forward that's been talked about a lot is, I think, a very good thing. And we just have to firm up the details, which we will be getting that filed in advance of the public hearing on the 15th of March, so that y'all, the amici, everyone can take a look at it, understand it, digest it, and then have questions about it. I'm certain there will be those. With regard to 341, I thought that a letter had gone out explaining that those recommendations would be included with the parties' recommendations at the end, so that will be happening. So those formal recommendations that are coming from y'all will be treated similarly to how they would be treated here in this flow chart.
Okay. You understand the mission we're on here with that, with 341. We're really trying to get the policy that APD has lined up with the ordinance.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I
All right.
noticed that. I noticed that right away. The language is fundamentally very similar or the same. And I think that will be it.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here. I
You're very
appreciate
welcome.
it.
Thank you.
I think Mr. Harness has some, I would hope that you could stay for his report because there may be some questions.
Yeah, certainly. I'll stick around.
Thank you. Mr. Harness? I was thinking of the MOU on UNM.
Oh, okay. Chair Fine, Honorable Board. Let's see, where shall I start? I think on behalf of the citizens of Albuquerque, we have to thank Michelle Contreras for her service. The IRO, the POC, the CPOA, and the POB. She's moving on to greener pastures. So congratulations to her and thank you. Based upon earlier conversations, thank you, Chair Fine, for your service leading the POB over the last year. And we look forward to your continued service on the board and your leadership. We received 37 complaints for the month of January, and we received 13 job well dones. As Deputy Chief Garcia and City Attorney Schmiel reported, there was a teleconference today with the amici and the stakeholders to review the meeting and the conversations that took place earlier in the day. As far as our portion of that, we will be appointed points of compliance, I believe, as it was done previously for the paragraphs for which we are responsible. I support the city and the monitor's position in the way forward as it's being contemplated with 2 mini reports so that the public understands that there's progress, but understands that the monitors are coming back into town as providing technical assistance and not evaluating. That evaluation will take place later. The next hearing, public hearing, will be the 15th of March at 1:30. I do not have a location for that yet, but it will be the open public meeting
At the court?
at one of the courthouses, one of the federal courthouses.
But it's with Judge Brack?
It's with Judge Brack. Judge Brack is entering senior status, so he's agreed to continue on this case, but he'll have a lighter caseload, so there may be more public hearings instead of the monthly teleconference hearings that take place, which I pass along those transcripts of those hearings for your review. We are going to begin the security construction upgrade to the office on the 19th of February. I have right now 5 attendees for the Citizens Police Academy. Myself, Dr. Cass, Chantel, Mr. Larson, and Ms. Van Den Venter. I've been practicing all day and I still can't get it. I'm sorry. Is there anyone else that would like to attend the academy for the 4 days? You have the schedule in front of you.
Mm-hmm. No, but I am interested in the use of force when we get to that.
Use of force is going to be all day, I believe, Saturday, the 3rd of March, I think, with...
Is that...
It's with Officer Ray Fritz.
Oh, you mean out of this 4-day session?
Out of the 4-day session. Oh, I'm sorry. It's on, actually, it's Sunday, the 25th of February.
Yeah, I meant when they do the training for the police officers.
Well, okay, yes. But for this CPA, the Citizens Police Academy, the use of force is going to be on the 25th
Okay.
of February.
So, you know, during this training, is it available for us just to go to that training in that day?
Can we just walk in, you mean?
Can I walk in and see here? Okay. Well, could
That's
you
a
look into
question that I
for me,
can't
please?
answer
Thank you.
at this point. But I can inquire
Oh, that would be fine,
and
thank you.
get back to you with that. How's that? If you've attended a ride-along in the last 60 days, please let me know so that I can annotate it in your training records. I had a meeting with the CAO last week, and we discussed better direct access to APD records, CADs, and reports for the investigative team. And we discussed the policy process along with cooperation with the department and the monitors. And we discussed a changing role for the community policing councils.
Can you give us more information than that? Or it's not done yet?
There's nothing that has been decided as far as what those roles are going to be. The manager has only been on for maybe a month now, Mr. Sylvan.
He's right behind you.
Mhm. And so he's getting a flavor for how each of them operates and what their obligations are under the settlement agreement versus how some of them may or may not be operating, shall we say. And I know that the city has pledged to help Mr. Sylvan guide them back on track, shall we say. After the last POB meeting, we did have a meeting with the monitor because there was a monitor site visit. Myself, Chair Fine, Dr. Cass, and Board Member St. John were there. And we met with Mr. Giaquinto for a couple of hours. And the bulk of the discussion was trying to clarify and get a better understanding of 3-46, the discipline policy, and the matrix, and trying to come to grips with how the board and how we make recommendations versus how the department evaluates it. Now, of course, there's been a change of administration, but Mr. Giaquinto believes even as 346 is written, there needs to be some rewriting of 346 so that it's clear how a certain act can be evaluated as a class of offense and whether or not it's a first, second, or third, and how any particular incident moves up that chain. And there needs to be, if in fact the department wants to closely associate acts in order for them to enhance the discipline, then that needs to be written into the policy because currently that does not exist in the policy. So that's going to be the focus once we actually get back to being evaluated and being monitored. Other than that, he finds that the quality of our investigations are good. There's always some tweaking that can be done. And he's also recommending that we work on an expansion of the definition of administratively closed cases, because right now that's very narrow. We have been administratively closing cases beyond that narrow definition, and he's evaluated that and understands why. And at this point, the monitor understands why as well, but he thinks that we need to turn that into writing so that there's an expanded definition of administratively closed cases. We also had a CPC summit at the Department of Justice office on the 17th. It was well attended. Virtually all of the APD command staff were there, along with representatives from all of the CPCs and members of the Police Oversight Board. It was a good discussion and setting a foundation. We have, it's been requested of us to have a CPC summit during the next monitor's visit in March. So Ms. Bustos is coordinating with the mayor's office so that we can find an evening that works for the mayor's schedule, because the mayor is adamant that he attend the next CPC summit. So we're going to make sure that we coordinate those schedules and make that happen for the CPCs. The MOU for mediation, I've been assured it will be drafted and ready for the March hearings so that we can move forward with that. It is in the Department of Justice's review process as of yesterday. It's been drafted and it's in their review process before it can be published. Attorney Jackson has drafted an MOU for the data analyst contract. We had a meeting, Mr. Jackson, myself, Dr. Verplu, to work out the wrinkles and to try to overcome the city's concerns. We think we've reached an understanding as to what those concerns are. And it relates to the board making a data request for data that doesn't exist electronically is really the bottom line, because there are some data points that are still paper, and it would, were the board to make that request for that type of a project or for that type of production of data, it would mean that the department would have to manually go through the files and capture that data in order to produce it. And I think that they're concerned that the board would make a request of that vein, and we don't know, what that would be at this point, and that would be too burdensome for the department to be able to perform. So Attorney Jackson has drafted an MOU, and I believe that we're all going to meet on the 13th to discuss it with the city.
February 13th?
February 13th.
Where?
That's not fully coordinated yet.
I want to be there.
But we would have all of the parties there to get this done finally. And that's all I have. I stand for questions.
I don't have any questions. Do you? No? I know. Just think jumping jacks in your mind. We're almost done. Okay. Thank you, Director Harness. We have our POB meeting for March? Why do we have May on here? Other business, because May is something with the City Council?
Chair Fine, that's correct. We've rescheduled the PLB meeting in May to May 16th.
Okay.
Because the City Council would be taking up
what day
quite
of the
a
week
few
is
dates.
Okay.
May 16th is a Wednesday.
Okay. So our next the May PLB meeting will not be the second Thursday. It will be May 16th, Wednesday, May 16th.
That's correct.
At 5 o'clock in this room.
Correct.
Okay. The only other outstanding piece of business is that I need to resign. I vacate my office as chair, though not my position on the board. I really have enjoyed doing this. But I am ready to pass the ball, I can tell you that. And I will be very active on the board going forward. However, I need to vacate this, as we discussed before. And since I'm vacating it, who handles then the election? Me? No, not me, because I'm vacated.
Chair Fine, you will handle the election.
Okay. All right. So we have an election of officers, the chair and the vice chair. Valerie, do you want to does anybody want to make any nominations? I know Valerie does.
Yeah, I do. For chair, I would like to nominate Leonard Waits. I think he's a great guy, and with his experience, I think he can help us move forward during this time.
I agree. Second that.
I agree.
Okay. Is that a motion, ma'am?
Yes, it has motion.
Okay, are there any other nominations? Does anybody else want to nominate anyone? Okay. There's a motion on the floor. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Raise that hand and you're a dead man. Okay, we have, yes, sir.
We've had a number of reports since we discussed this earlier in the meeting. I would like to remind the board that per the ordinance, we'll need to do this again
In
next
March?
month. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, just to cover all our bases. Okay, a second office of the board is the vice chair of the board, and I would accept any nominations from the floor.
Chair Fine, I make a motion that I nominate, just to make a motion, Valerie as my vice.
Are there any other nominations from the floor?
He wants to, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Chair Fine and Member Waits, although there's nothing wrong with vacating and renominating, Vice Chair St. John has not yet served a year, so it's not necessary to do that at this time.
Look, can we just do it anyway, just to be sure?
Sure.
Okay. All right, any other nominations for vice chair?
Just a point of order, is that acceptable within the rules of succession?
Chair Fine, or Chair Waits, and Dr. Cass, that is a good point, and that does create a problem because an officer can't immediately succeed themselves.
Even in the vice chair office? I thought it was just the chair's office.
Let me double check that.
Don't tell me that's not good.
Yeah, no officer shall be eligible to immediately succeed himself or herself.
All right, so I thought it was different because I took over Garcia's place when she resigned. So I've only been vice chair for a few months. So does that have any?
Chair Waits and Vice Chair St. John, that is correct. There's no reason for the vice chair to step down at this time unless she so desires.
Okay, I'll stay, thank you.
Okay, so she can be nominated
No,
for
I don't
this.
need to be.
Just
She
stay.
just
Resign
stays.
her
Just
position.
stay. Okay, just stay. Safe, okay. I need a motion to this effect. Oh, no, I don't.
I made the
Okay,
nomination.
so we're good. Okay, I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I second,
Yes, you need to make a motion to adjourn.
I need a motion to.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Okay.
Second?
I second and third
All
that.
those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you all. That was a lot of information.